The doorbell shattered the morning calm like glass under pressure. Grace Porter froze mid-step, her hand still resting on the oxygen monitor strapped to little Jude's arm. Upstairs, the faint hum of the nebulizer filled the nursery steady as a heartbeat. By the time she reached the foyer, sunlight had crept across the marble floor, sharp and sterile. Alistair Merrick was waiting. The billionaire founder of Pulse Core Systems stood by the kitchen island in running gear sweat, on his temples a black security case in his hand. His voice came out low and controlled. "Sit down, Grace." Her pulse quickened. Something in his tone carried weight, final, merciless. He opened the case. Inside, 2 empty vials gleamed against the foam lining. These were missing from the medical refrigerator. The only person with clearance to that room is you. Grace's stomach tightened. "Sir, that's not possible. The logs say otherwise," he replied. The door opened at 11:58 last Thursday. No one else was on duty. I was with Jude. He had a fever. The nurse clocked out at 10. "The cameras show you entering alone." He turned his tablet toward her. The footage showed a dark figure, her figure slipping through the pharmacy door. No sound, no context, only shadows that betrayed her. "I went in to check the temperature," she said quietly. "Not to steal." Alistair's eyes stayed cold. "Those doses are worth more than $200,000. They're the only reason my sons are still breathing. Do you expect me to believe this is a coincidence?" Grace's voice shook. "I love those boys. I'd never hurt them." He cut her off. "Love doesn't change facts. You violated protocol. I'm filing a report, police medical board, everyone." The room tilted. For years, she devoted herself to Oliver and Jude, midnight feedings, panic attacks, nights spent monitoring their machines until dawn. Now all of that collapsed into suspicion and silence. "There must be another explanation," she whispered. "A system glitch, maybe." "No," he said flatly. "You're finished here." Behind him, the head of security appeared, expression unreadable. Through the window, paparazzi gathered beyond the gate's lenses, already rising like rifles. Grace stood slowly. "You're wrong, Mr. Merrick." "You'll see." "I hope not," he said. "For their sake." Her throat burned, but she didn't cry. She gathered her cardigan and the notebook, where she'd recorded every dosage, every breath. As she stepped outside, flashbulbs exploded. "Grace Porter, did you steal the medicine? Were you selling it? Was it revenge against the Merricks?" She kept walking, each shout echoing like a hammer in her skull. The air smelled of salt and gasoline from the bay, heavy and bitter. At the gate, she paused, forcing herself to breathe. The humiliation cut deep, but deeper still was the image of Oliver's small hand, clutching hers during his last coughing fit, whispering, "Don't leave." Inside the mansion, Alistair watched through the window, jaw tight, convinced he had done the right thing. Yet something about her calm unsettled him. People who lied usually begged. She hadn't. Upstairs in the nursery, the monitors blinked green and steady. Jude stirred, calling faintly for Grace in his sleep. Oliver's breathing rasped, soft and uneven. Without her, the rhythm faltered just slightly, as though the house itself had forgotten how to breathe. Outside, Grace walked down the long driveway toward the rising sun. Her face was pale, but her eyes had sharpened with something stronger than fear. The world might have decided she was guilty, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would not stay silent. Somewhere behind the wealth and power of Alistair Merrick lay the truth, and she was going to find it, even if it meant burning everything down to reach it. The Merrick mansion was painfully still that morning. Machines hummed beside the twin boys' beds, measuring each fragile breath. 8-year-old Oliver stirred, reaching toward the empty chair. "Miss Grace," he whispered, but the oxygen pump answered in soft clicks. Across Melbourne, Grace Porter sat in her tiny apartment above a bakery in Fitzroy. A mug of coffee cooled beside her untouched. On her phone, headlines screamed, "Billionaire fires nanny for stealing life, saving medicine." The photos showed her walking away from the estate, face half hidden behind flashing lights. She turned the phone over, pressing her palms to her temples until the noise in her head went quiet. For 3 years she had lived for those boys, Oliver and Jude children, whose lungs betrayed them, whose laughter had to fight its way out. Every alarm, every sleepless night, every sigh of relief when they made it through another storm belonged to her. And now to everyone else, she was a thief. Her brother Evan, a paramedic, called again. "Grace, don't talk to reporters," he said. "You still have the data from the medicine fridge. It backs up automatically to the cloud." "Good. Let me check the timestamps. Maybe they were altered." She hesitated. "You think someone framed me. I think someone wanted you out of that house," he said. "Give me one night." Grace looked out the window. The air smelled of rain and baked bread. The city kept moving uncaring while her life crumbled in slow motion. At the Merrick estate, Alistair sat in his glass-walled office, replaying the security footage. Grace appeared on screen, stepping into the pharmacy room. Then 3 seconds of static before the feed resumed. He stared at the glitched jaw tight. A coincidence, he told himself. Still, the way she'd looked at him, hurt, not guilty, refused to fade. His lawyer, Miranda Pike, entered briskly. "The police will finish their report soon," she said. "We need to release a statement before the press writes its own version." "I want the truth, not spin," Alistair muttered. "In your world, they're the same," she replied, and walked out. Moments later, the nurse appeared. "Sir, the boys won't eat. They're asking for Miss Grace. Tell them she's on leave. They said she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye." He looked away. "Handle it," he said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction. That afternoon, Grace met Evan at a cafe near the Yarra River. He placed his tablet on the table. "Look at this." The fridge door opened at 11:58 p.m., but temperature sensors didn't record movement until midnight. 3 missing minutes. Grace frowned. "Someone could have gone in before me." Or after, he said. Either way, the log was changed. Her pulse quickened. "Who would risk that someone with more access than you?" he replied. "Maybe someone close to Merrick." She leaned back, the realization sinking in. They needed a scapegoat, and I was perfect. When she returned home that evening, an envelope waited under her door. No address, no name. Inside was a single typed line, "You were framed. Check Thursday's security feed between 11:55 and midnight. The truth isn't where you think." Her breath caught. The paper smelled faintly of antiseptic, like the hospital pharmacy. Someone inside knew what had happened. Grace set the note beside her worn notebook, filled with dosage records. "All right," she whispered. "Let's see what you're hiding." Outside, the city glowed under a heavy gray sky. Somewhere beyond those lights, her name was being destroyed. But Grace Porter wasn't broken. She was waiting. Tomorrow, she would return to those missing 3 minutes and prove that the truth, no matter how buried, still had a heartbeat. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire's twins in danger. After Nanny's betrayal. Grace didn't finish reading. She pulled on her coat and stepped into the gray chill of Melbourne's dawn. Reporters waited near the bakery downstairs, cameras flashing like lightning. She kept her head low, her pulse steady. To the city, she was guilty, before she'd even spoken. Across the river, Alistair Merrick sat in his glass office surrounded by public relations experts. "We can turn this," one said. "You're a devoted father protecting his sons." He nodded, but his eyes were fixed on the tablet showing Grace stepping into the pharmacy room. He replayed it again and again, uneasy. Guilt wasn't familiar to him, but something about her calm still haunted him. Later that morning, Grace met Evan at a cafe on Bourke Street. He wasn't alone. "Grace, this is Mila Nguyen," he said. "She's an investigative journalist. She wants to help." Mila's handshake was firm. "I've seen cases like this, data-altered stories buried. Do you still have access to the fridge logs?" "They back up automatically every night," Grace said. Mila turned her laptop toward them. "Then someone accessed them again on Friday. The IP traces to Pulse Corps' legal department." Grace froze. "Miranda Pike." Evan frowned. The lawyer, Mila, nodded. "If she touched the logs, it's no accident. But we'll need solid proof." That night, Mila called a contact at St. Vincent's Cybersecurity Division. "I need power outage reports for the Merrick estate Thursday around midnight," she said. The data came through minutes later. Only 16 seconds of voltage loss, far too brief to cause the 3-minute camera glitch. "So someone stopped the feed manually," Mila whispered. At the mansion, Alistair lingered outside the nursery. The twins sat on their beds, drawing quietly. When Oliver noticed him, he held up a sketch 3 stick figures holding hands, one with long brown hair. Above it, scrawled words read, "She saves us." Alistair swallowed hard, guilt twisting somewhere deep. That night, he replayed the security footage again. In the reflection of the medicine cabinet behind Grace, a faint shadow moved just before the screen cut to static. He paused, zoomed in. Someone else had been there. Across town, Grace combed through her old notebook of medical logs. Every page matched the official reports, except one the night she was accused. Her handwriting showed the final dosage at 11:58 p.m. The hospital record listed 11:45. 13 missing minutes, the same window the footage had failed. "They changed the time," she whispered. Evan leaned over her shoulder. "That's tampering. It proves you didn't do it. It's something she said, but they'll call it human error. Then we'll find more." The next morning, Mila texted, "Meet me outside the courthouse at 9. Bring the notebook." Grace hesitated, gripping the worn book. Walking into that place meant facing everyone who had condemned her. But she'd already lost everything except the truth. When she arrived, reporters swarmed again. "Grace, do you deny stealing Will? You sue the Merricks?" She ignored them, climbing the courthouse steps. Evan waited at the top beside Mila, who handed her a printed image. 2 silhouettes stood in the pharmacy room, one clearly Grace, the other taller, unrecognized. Grace's pulse steadied. The story that had painted her as a villain had started to crack. For the first time since her world collapsed, she saw a way through the smoke. The truth was still buried, but it was breathing, and when it surfaced, it wouldn't just clear her name. It would expose the lies the Merrick Empire had built to stay untouchable. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air. Grace Porter sat alone at the defense table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The noise of cameras outside had followed her here, a swarm of whispers pressing against the glass doors. She had dressed in the same pale blouse she once wore while feeding the twins. It was all she had left that made her feel steady. Across the aisle, Alistair Merrick entered surrounded by lawyers. His suit was dark, his posture perfect, every movement rehearsed. The crowd rose instinctively as he walked past, as if power itself demanded acknowledgement. He didn't look at her. Judge Harold O'Connor, gray-haired and impatient, adjusted his glasses. "Let's begin," he said, voice clipped. The prosecution, led by Miranda Pike, rose first. "Your Honor, the evidence will show that the defendant, Grace Porter, deliberately removed 2 doses of a rare medication valued at over $100,000 each. She had exclusive access, motive, and opportunity." Miranda clicked a remote. The screen flickered with images, the medical fridge, the security feed, Grace's shadow moving through the doorway. The room seemed to shrink around her. Grace's pulse thudded in her ears. She wanted to speak, to explain, but her assigned lawyer hadn't arrived. The judge frowned. "Where is defense counsel?" Miranda replied smoothly. "Apparently delayed, Your Honor." The judge sighed. "Then Miss Porter will have to represent herself until counsel appears. Proceed." Miranda smiled thinly. "Of course." She turned back to the jury. The theft placed 2 children's lives in jeopardy. This was no mistake. It was betrayal. Her words rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. People shifted uncomfortably, already convinced. Grace rose slowly. "May I speak?" The judge hesitated. Briefly, she faced the jury, voice trembling but clear. "I cared for those boys every day for 3 years. I didn't steal anything. Someone changed the records, altered the times." Miranda cut in. "Objection. Speculation," sustained, the judge said. "Stick to facts, Miss Porter." She sat down, her throat burning. Every truth she held felt useless here. Alistair finally looked her way. His eyes were cold, but behind the mask she saw exhaustion. He whispered something to Miranda, who nodded and pulled out another file. "Your Honor," she said, "we have financial evidence. A new bank account in the defendant's name received a transfer of $200,000 the day after the theft." Gasps filled the room. Grace stared, stunned. "That's not mine." Miranda's smile didn't waver. "The account bears your signature, your address." Judge O'Connor peered down at her. "Miss Porter, how do you explain this?" "I can't. I never opened any account." The judge scribbled notes. The gavel struck once. "Enough for today. We'll reconvene tomorrow." As the court adjourned, reporters surged forward. Guards moved to block them, but their questions sliced through the noise. "Grace, did you take the money? Do you regret betraying the Merricks?" She kept walking head low until the doors closed behind her. Outside, the gray sky hung heavy. Mila waited near the courthouse steps, phone in hand. "I pulled the IP log," she said quietly. "That fake account was created from Miranda's office computer." Grace blinked. "Can you prove it?" "Not yet. But we're getting close." Evan joined them, his medic jacket damp from rain. "We're not stopping, Grace. Those kids still need you." She nodded, gripping her notebook. "Then we keep digging." Behind them, through the tall courthouse windows, Alistair stood watching. For the first time, doubt crept into his expression. He had built his world on certainty, but as he watched Grace disappear into the rain, one thought refused to leave him. What if he had just destroyed the only person who ever told him the truth? Rain traced long, trembling lines down the courthouse windows the next morning. Grace Porter arrived before sunrise, clutching her worn notebook against her chest as if it could shield her from the eyes waiting to devour her. Reporters shouted questions from the steps, flashes cutting through the gloom, but she didn't slow down. Each footstep echoed across the marble like a heartbeat, slow, steady, defiant. Inside, Alistair Merrick sat surrounded by lawyers and security guards. His face was calm, unreadable, the perfect mask of a billionaire used to control. yet a faint tightness around his mouth betrayed exhaustion. Miranda Pike stood beside him, every movement crisp and deliberate, like a woman who had never lost a case and didn't plan to start now. Judge Harold O'Connor entered gray-haired and sharp-eyed. The gavel struck once. Court is now in session. Proceed, Ms. Pike. Miranda rose with practiced grace. Your Honor, the prosecution presents new evidence that confirms Miss Porter's guilt. She pressed a button on her remote. The screen lit up with a series of text messages. These were retrieved from the defendant's phone. They showed discussions with an anonymous buyer arranging payment for stolen medication. The room erupted in whispers. Grace stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The words looked like hers, same phrasing, same tone, but she'd never written them. That's fabricated, she said, standing. Those messages aren't mine. Miranda's reply was effortless. Metadata confirms they originated from your phone, Miss Porter. The timestamps align exactly with the night the medicine vanished. Grace clenched the table's edge. Check the GPS data. I was at the hospital with one of the twins. Objection, Miranda snapped. Irrelevant. The judge waved her down. I'll decide what's relevant. Continue. Miranda turned to the jury, her tone softening just enough. Miss Porter faced financial stress, no savings, no family nearby. Desperation often drives betrayal. Grace's voice broke through low but fierce. Desperation doesn't steal medicine. It prays for a cure. Ask the boys who trusted me. Silence followed. Alistair shifted in his seat, his certainty flickering. At the back of the courtroom, journalist Mila Nguyen typed rapidly. A message popped up from her cybersecurity contact. The text data shows forged layers, not original files. She forwarded it to Evan, who slipped quietly from the gallery. Meanwhile, Miranda pressed forward. Your Honor, we've located a hidden bank account in the defendant's name. $200,000 deposited the morning after the theft. Gasps filled the room. Grace went cold. That account isn't mine. Miranda smiled faintly. The signature and address match yours perfectly. Judge O'Connor frowned. We'll verify the financial records during recess. Court stands adjourned for 30 minutes. The gavel hit wood. The crowd erupted into murmurs. Grace sank into her chair, numb. Minutes later, Evan returned, breathless. The messages are fake, he whispered. Mila traced the upload to PulseCore's legal server Miranda's office. Grace blinked. Then she created them. She's covering something bigger, Evan said. When court resumed, Grace stood. Your Honor, I request an independent forensic review of the prosecution's digital evidence. The data originated from a device inside Miss Pike's firm. Miranda's mask cracked. That's outrageous. Grace's eyes locked on hers. Then prove it. Show your phone logs. The room went silent. Even the judge hesitated. Then Miranda's phone buzzed loudly on the table. She snatched it up too quickly. Every head turned. The judge leaned forward. Tomorrow, all devices and records will be examined under supervision. Court adjourned. As the gavel struck, Miranda's fingers trembled. Grace closed her notebook, heart steady for the first time. The truth wasn't free yet, but it had found its voice, and it was growing louder by the hour. Thunder rolled across the Melbourne skyline as Grace Porter walked back into the courthouse for the afternoon session. The air inside felt heavier than before, thick with tension and whispers. She took her seat at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly over her notebook. Every eye followed her. To most in the room, she was still the woman who had betrayed 2 sick children. But Grace wasn't afraid anymore. Beneath her calm, something unyielding had begun to rise. Alistair Merrick entered moments later, expression rigid, his presence commanding immediate silence. Miranda Pike followed, carrying a sleek folder. Her steps measured her confidence, unshaken. Yet as she passed Grace, their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and for the first time, Miranda blinked first. Judge Harold O'Connor adjusted his glasses and spoke. "Court is now back in session. Ms. Pike, continue with your evidence." Miranda stepped forward. "Your Honor, we have corroborating proof, supporting the defendant's guilt." She clicked the remote, and new images filled the screen: bank statements, transaction records, and a signed document authorizing a transfer. These files confirm Miss Porter's connection to the stolen funds. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Grace's heart pounded, but she didn't look away. "Those documents are fake," she said. "Someone forged them." Miranda arched a brow. "Everything has been verified by the bank. The defendant's signature is right there." Grace stood slowly. "Then call the bank representative," she said. "Let them confirm who opened that account." The judge looked at Miranda. "Can we do that?" Her hesitation lasted barely a second. "The witness is unavailable at the moment, Your Honor." "Convenient," Grace murmured under her breath. At the back of the room, Mila Nguyen slipped in quietly with her laptop bag. She caught Evan's eye and nodded once. Evan leaned forward to Grace's ear. "We have it. The metadata from the account file, it was created on a PulseCore legal server, not the bank's." Grace's pulse quickened. "Send it to me." When the court recessed for a short break, Grace approached the judge's clerk. "Your Honor, I have new evidence to submit." The judge agreed to review it privately before the next session. Minutes later, when court resumed, O'Connor's voice cut through the noise. "Ms. Pike, can you explain why the financial documents submitted earlier were generated from your firm's internal system?" The room froze. Miranda blinked, then recovered quickly. "That's impossible," she said. "It must be a technical misread." "Unlikely," the judge replied. "The data path shows clear creation logs within your firm's network." Whispers erupted among the audience. Grace watched Miranda carefully. The woman's hand gripped her folder too tightly, knuckles pale. Alistair turned toward her, his composure cracking. "Miranda." She avoided his gaze. "Sir, I'll look into it." Grace finally spoke. "You accused me of lies, but the evidence speaks for itself. Someone inside PulseCore framed me." The judge raised a hand. "That will be for the investigators to determine, Miss Porter. But this court will not ignore tampered evidence." He struck the gavel once. "All submissions from the prosecution are temporarily suspended pending digital verification." Miranda's lips parted, but no sound came out. She sat down slowly, her confidence leaking away, like air from a punctured tire. As the courtroom emptied, Grace remained seated, watching Alistair's once perfect composure dissolve into disbelief. He had believed in power and evidence in his lawyer. But now the first cracks in his empire had begun to show. Outside rain hammered the courthouse steps. As Grace stepped into the storm, her notebook clutched to her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her name anymore. She was fighting to expose every lie that had poisoned the truth. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. The rain had stopped by evening, but the city still glistened with puddles reflecting red street lights. Grace Porter sat in her apartment, staring at the files Mila had sent. The documents confirmed what she already knew: Miranda Pike had forged the evidence. The fake bank account, the doctored messages, all of it traced back to PulseCore's internal server. Proof was finally taking shape. She closed her laptop, exhaling shakily. For the first time in weeks, her fear felt smaller than her determination. Evan paced the small kitchen behind her. "Once this goes public, everything changes," he said. "But we need to move carefully. Miranda won't fall alone. She'll drag Merrick down too." Grace looked out the window toward the skyline, where the Merrick Tower stood like a blade of glass cutting through the clouds. "Then let her," she said quietly. He let it happen. At that same moment, Alistair Merrick sat in his study, the house silent, except for the low hum of the twins' medical monitors upstairs. He hadn't spoken to Miranda since the judge's warning that afternoon. The accusation against her had spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Investors were already calling, worried about integrity issues. He poured a drink he didn't touch, staring at the rain streaking the window. For years, control had been his weapon. Now it was slipping through his hands. When his son's nurse entered to remind him about their next dose, he hesitated. "Do they still ask about her? Every night," she said softly. "They won't take the medicine unless I tell them Miss Grace sent it." Alistair knotted his chest tight. He wanted to believe she was guilty. It would make everything simpler, but the evidence no longer fit. Miranda's confidence had cracked. He'd seen it in her eyes. The next morning, Grace met Mila and Evan at a small co-working space near the river. "We can't just hand this to the court," Mila said. "If the wrong person sees it first, it disappears." "So we leak it," Evan said. Grace shook her head. "Not yet. I want justice, not chaos. We'll present it properly when the judge can't ignore it." Mila nodded, pulling up a video on her laptop. This came from a backup security camera outside the pharmacy wing. The footage wasn't on the official file. "It shows two figures entering that night. One was you, Grace. The other—" She hit pause. A taller figure in a long coat appeared behind Grace's reflection. The face wasn't clear, but the posture was unmistakable. Miranda Pike. Grace stared at the screen. She was there. Exactly. She deleted herself from the main footage, Mila said. But the mirrored reflection caught her. Evan grinned. "That's our proof." Grace leaned back, her pulse steady. "Tomorrow, I'll show the court what they refuse to see." Meanwhile, at the Merrick estate, Miranda stormed into Alistair's office. "You're going to let them ruin us," she demanded. He stood slowly. "Us? You forged evidence, Miranda." "I protected your name," she hissed. "Without me, you'd have lost everything." "I may still," he said quietly. "But I won't lose my son's trust." For the first time, she faltered. "You think they'll forgive her?" "They already have," he replied. The following morning, Grace stepped into the courthouse with calm she hadn't felt before. Mila carried the video files, Evan the printed data logs. Reporters shouted her name again, but this time she didn't lower her head. Inside, Miranda sat pale and tense. Alistair arrived minutes later, his expression unreadable. As the judge entered, the air thickened with anticipation. Grace looked across the aisle at her accuser, her former employer, and the empire that had crushed her. Today, she thought the truth finally gets its day in court. The courtroom was packed to its limits the next morning. Reporters filled the aisle's cameras, flashing like lightning before a storm. The air vibrated with tension, anticipation mixed with judgment. Grace Porter sat upright at the defense table, her notebook closed neatly before her. Gone was the frightened nanny. The woman sitting there now had steel in her spine and truth on her side. Judge Harold O'Connor entered gavel in hand. "Court is now in session," he announced. "Miss Porter, I understand you have new evidence to submit." Yes, Your Honor, Grace said, rising. Her voice carried through the room, steady but full of emotion. This evidence proves that the prosecution's materials were falsified. Across the aisle, Miranda Pike stiffened. Your Honor, the defense is attempting to delay proceedings with baseless sit-down, Ms. Pike. The judge interrupted sharply. We'll hear her out. Grace nodded to Mila Nguyen, who connected her laptop to the projector. The lights dimmed, and the screen flickered to life. This footage, Grace explained, was recovered from a backup camera near the pharmacy wing. It was omitted from the original submission. The video played. Grace appeared entering the pharmacy room, adjusting the monitors as she had countless times before. Then, seconds before the glitch, another figure stepped into the frame, a taller woman in a long coat. The reflection in the glass revealed her face for a split second. Miranda Pike. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Miranda's composure faltered. Her smile tightened like a crack under pressure. The judge leaned forward. Ms. Pike, do you wish to respond? That isn't me, she said quickly. The video is distorted. Grace's tone was calm but cutting. Distortion doesn't create reflections. It reveals what someone tried to erase. Evans stepped forward, holding a folder. Your Honor, we have server logs from PulseCore's internal network. They show Ms. Pike accessed and edited video files the morning after the alleged theft. The room erupted in murmurs. The judge's expression hardened. Ms. Pike, this is a serious accusation. Were you tampering with evidence? Miranda's voice faltered. I was reviewing them for clarity. Mr. Merrick asked me to. Alistair's head snapped toward her. That's not true, he said quietly. She turned on him, her calm dissolving. Everything I did was for you to protect your company, your sons, your reputation. Chaos exploded. Reporters shouted, pens scraped across, paper cameras clicked in rapid fire. The judge slammed his gavel. Order Grace remained still, her heart pounding, but her expression unshaken. For weeks, she had been buried under lies. Now the lies were crumbling in front of her. The judge spoke firmly. Bailiff, confiscate all devices belonging to Ms. Pike. She will remain for questioning regarding evidence tampering. Miranda's face drained of color. You can't do this? You don't know what's at stake. On the contrary, the judge said. We finally do. Her eyes darted toward Alistair again, pleading and accusing at once. But the billionaire who had once looked invincible now looked small, fragile, under the weight of truth. The gavel struck again. Court adjourned until further notice. As people stood, the noise surged. Grace didn't move. She sat breathing slowly, the tension easing from her shoulders. Across the room, Alistair finally looked at her, not as the woman he blamed, but as the one who had saved his children and told the truth when no one else dared. For the first time, the courtroom didn't feel like a prison. It felt like freedom breaking through the walls. The truth had been buried under money and power, but now it was alive, and it had her voice. The following morning, a low hum of unease filled the courthouse. The press had camped outside overnight, waiting for what promised to be the most explosive hearing yet. Grace Porter stepped from a taxi, clutching her notebook, her heart steady but heavy. The air was sharp, the kind of cold that made breath visible. Cameras flashed, voices shouted her name, but she kept walking. She wasn't the story's victim anymore, she was its reckoning. Inside the courtroom was tense. Miranda Pike sat pale and silent, a shadow of her former confidence. Her lawyers whispered frantically, but she didn't respond. Alistair Merrick entered a few minutes later. No entourage, no security. For the first time, he looked older, smaller, like a man facing ghosts he'd tried too long to ignore. Judge Harold O'Connor took his seat and struck the gavel. We reconvene regarding evidence tampering and the allegations against Miss Porter. Ms. Pike, you've been given an opportunity to clarify your actions. Miranda stood slowly, her voice thin. Your Honor, I made an error in judgment. I accessed the files to review them. I never intended harm. Then how do you explain appearing in the recovered footage, the judge asked. She hesitated. That isn't me. Mila Nguyen rose from the gallery. Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to submit authentication reports verifying the footage. The judge nodded. Proceed. Mila handed the documents to the clerk. These reports confirm that the video is original and unaltered. The reflection visible matches Ms. Pike's facial structure within a 98% confidence rate. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Miranda's composure cracked entirely. You don't understand, she shouted. I wasn't stealing the medicine, I was relocating it. Mr. Merrick ordered enough, the judge barked. You will answer only what you are asked. Alistair rose slowly. No. Let her speak. All eyes turned toward him. Miranda, he said, voice low. Are you saying I instructed you to forge evidence and destroy someone's life? She stared at him, trembling. You told me to protect the company? I did what I thought you wanted. He closed his eyes. You wanted to protect yourself. The room was silent. Reporters scribbled furiously. The judge's gavel came down once more. Given the new evidence, this court will suspend all charges against Miss Porter pending full review. Ms. Pike will be held for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering. Miranda's knees buckled. Guards stepped forward as she whispered, I was just following orders. Grace sat motionless, tears burning behind her eyes. She had imagined this moment 100 times, but never expected it to feel so hollow. There was no triumph, only exhaustion. When Miranda was escorted out, the courtroom's energy shifted. Alistair remained standing, his shoulders slumped. The empire he'd built on power and precision had collapsed in front of everyone. The judge turned to Grace. Miss Porter, I apologize on behalf of this court. You were wronged. Justice will now follow the evidence, not assumption. Grace nodded faintly. Thank you, Your Honor. As the hearing adjourned, people began to stand, murmuring disbelief and sympathy. Reporters shouted questions, but Grace ignored them. She looked across the room at Alistair. His gaze met hers, heavy with remorse. Outside, the gray sky broke open with sunlight for the first time in days. Grace stepped through the courthouse doors into the bright air. The noise of cameras followed, but she didn't hide. She turned her face to the light and breathed. The storm had passed, but its echo would stay. And though the fight wasn't over for the first time, she knew the truth no longer belonged to those who tried to bury it. It belonged to her. The next day, the courtroom was quieter but heavier. The chaos had burned off, leaving behind something colder consequences. Grace Porter sat near the front, her notebook resting on her lap. Her body felt drained, but her resolve hadn't faded. She had won a battle, not the war. Judge O'Connor entered and struck his gavel once. This hearing will review new developments following Ms. Pike's detainment. His voice carried the weight of finality. We will now hear testimony from the remaining parties. Alistair Merrick rose slowly from his seat. The once impenetrable billionaire looked human now, hollow eyes, a stiffness in his shoulders. Your Honor, he began, I believed what I was told. I trusted my legal counsel and the evidence provided. But I was wrong. He turned toward Grace. I was wrong about her most of all. The room fell silent. Even the journalists stopped writing. Grace met his gaze but said nothing. There were no words strong enough to erase what he'd done. I let fear make decisions for me. Alistair continued. I saw a loyal caregiver as a liability instead of the woman who kept my sons alive. I can't undo that, but I can take responsibility for it. Judge O'Connor nodded gravely. That acknowledgement will be noted, Mr. Merrick. However, your failure of oversight contributed to the defamation of an innocent person. Yes, Your Honor, Alistair said softly. I accept that. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned toward the prosecution table and placed a folded letter on it. I've issued a full confession outlining Ms. Pike's actions and my negligence. I request the court redirect its investigation toward the misuse of PulseCorps' medical distribution network. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The judge glanced at the document, eyes narrowing. Are you saying this went beyond Ms. Pike's misconduct? Alistair nodded. Yes. There were others executives profiting from the black market resale of unused medicine. The theft Grace was accused of wasn't isolated. It was a cover-up. The courtroom erupted in noise. The judge hammered his gavel until the room settled. This is now a criminal matter beyond the scope of this trial. An independent investigation will be ordered immediately. Grace sat motionless, absorbing every word. Her name was no longer a weapon, it was a shield. The truth had grown larger than her pain. When the hearing recessed, Alistair approached her quietly. Grace, he said, voice rough, I don't expect forgiveness. But I want you to know I'm dissolving PulseCorps' medical division. The profits that destroyed lives will fund treatment programs for children like mine. She studied him for a long moment. It won't erase what happened. I know, he said. But maybe it can mean something. For the first time, she saw sincerity behind his eyes. Broken, but real, Evans stepped forward from the gallery. Grace, the press wants a statement. What do we tell them? She looked down at her notebook, the same one she'd clung to since the beginning. Every page carried the story of her innocence, every date and signature proof of her devotion. She closed it gently. Tell them the truth, she said. That justice doesn't erase scars, it just stops the bleeding. As the court adjourned, flashes erupted again, but this time they didn't sting. Grace walked through the noise, head high. Outside, the air smelled of wet stone and sunlight breaking through clouds. The nightmare that had consumed her life was ending, but the truth she had fought for was only beginning to speak, and now it was louder than every lie ever told against her. The city pulsed with breaking headlines that afternoon. Billionaire's nanny found innocent corporate corruption exposed at PulseCorps. Grace Porter sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the muted television above the vending machines. Her face filled the screen walking out of the courthouse beneath a sky finally free of rain. She hardly recognized herself. For months, she had lived under suspicion and shame. Now her name stood for something else: survival. Evan slid into the seat across from her, coffee in hand. You did it, he said, smiling tiredly. Grace shook her head. The truth did. He leaned forward. Still, not many people would have fought this far. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A message flashed on the screen from Alistair Merrick. Please come to the house. The boys won't eat until they see you. Grace's breath caught. She hadn't been near that mansion since the day he accused her. Part of her wanted to delete the message and let him live with his guilt. But the thought of Oliver and Jude, their small, trembling hands, overpowered everything else. I'm going, she said quietly. When she arrived, the gates opened automatically as if they had been waiting for her. The mansion felt different, smaller somehow, less imposing. Alistair stood in the foyer, his shoulders stooped, his voice unsteady. "Grace, thank you for coming." "The boys, I didn't come for you," she said gently. "I came for them." He nodded and stepped aside. Upstairs, laughter drifted from the nursery. Grace opened the door, and both twins looked up. Miss Grace Oliver shouted. Jude pushed his wheelchair toward her, smiling so wide it broke her heart. She dropped to her knees between them, hugging them tightly. "I missed you so much." "We knew you didn't do it," Jude said proudly. "We told Daddy." Grace's throat tightened. "You're brave boys," she whispered. "You always believed." They clung to her as if afraid she might disappear again. For the first time in months, she felt peace. Not the absence of pain, but the return of purpose. From the doorway, Alistair watched silently. "They haven't smiled like this in weeks," he said. "Grace, I know I can't erase what I did, but I want to make it right. Will you stay, not as an employee, but as family?" Grace stood slowly facing him. "I can forgive, but I won't forget," she said quietly. "I don't want you to forget," he replied. "I just want the chance to do better." She looked at the twins, two fragile reasons to believe people could change, and nodded once. "For them, I'll stay. They need stability more than anything." Outside, the world still buzzed. Reporters waited by the gates, but Grace didn't stop to speak. She walked to the garden instead, where spring flowers trembled in the wind. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of new beginnings. Mila called from behind her. "They're arresting more Pulse Corps executives," she said. "You didn't just clear your name, you changed everything." Grace turned toward the house, her voice calm. "I didn't change anything. I just refused to let a lie be the last word." As dusk fell, the mansion glowed softly from within. The laughter of the twins echoed down the hallway. Grace stood in the doorway watching them. For the first time, the house didn't feel heavy with wealth or guilt. It felt alive. Outside, the last of the storm clouds faded. Inside, Grace Porter exhaled slowly, finally breathing without fear. Justice had given her back her life, but love, quiet and patient, had given it meaning again. The courthouse was quieter that morning, but the air still carried the weight of everything that had happened. Reporters waited outside, fewer than before, but still determined to capture the final chapter. Inside, the last hearing of Porter v. Merrick was about to begin. Grace Porter sat at the defense table, the same place where she had once trembled in fear. Today, her hands were steady, her eyes calm. Judge Harold O'Connor entered, his tone measured. "This session will issue the final ruling and determine damages in the matter of wrongful accusation against Miss Porter." His gaze shifted from Alistair Merrick to Grace. "Both parties may speak before judgment." Alistair rose first. The proud billionaire who once ruled every room now looked smaller, more human. "Your Honor," he began, voice low, "there's no defense for what I did. I let power and fear decide what was true. I believed forged evidence and chose silence when I should have sought clarity. I failed as an employer and as a father. Miss Porter's character was tested, and she proved stronger than all of us." He paused, eyes full of regret. "Whatever the court orders, I will accept it." Grace stood next, her voice steady but filled with quiet emotion. "Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. I lost my job, my reputation, and months of my life. I've been judged by strangers, by headlines, even by people I loved. But I don't want this trial to end in bitterness. I just want it to mean something, that truth still matters, even when it takes everything to prove it. The judge listened carefully, then nodded. Understood. He opened his notes and spoke firmly. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, this court declares Miss Grace Porter innocent of all charges. Mr. Alistair Merrick is ordered to pay full restitution for defamation legal fees and emotional damages. The gavel struck once. It was over. The courtroom exhaled. Reporters' scribbled cameras flashed, but Grace barely heard them. Her gaze went to the back of the room where Oliver and Jude sat beside their nurse, small and smiling. When their eyes met, they waved shyly. She smiled back through tears. Outside, the crowd surged around her. "Grace, how does it feel to finally win?" one reporter shouted. Grace stopped on the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at her coat. "This isn't about winning," she said softly. "It's about surviving long enough for the truth to breathe." The murmurs quieted. For once, the microphones lowered. That afternoon, she met Alistair outside the hospital where she had begun volunteering again. He looked humbled, his voice quiet. "Thank you," he said. "You could have destroyed me, but you didn't." Grace studied him for a long moment. "You destroyed yourself, Alistair. I just stopped carrying the weight of it." He nodded. "The boys talk about you every day. They call you family." Her expression softened. "They are my family." For a moment, silence hung between them, two people who had walked through the same fire, each burned in different ways. Then he turned and walked away, swallowed by the noise of the city. That evening, Grace returned home. She set her old notebook on the table, the one filled with every detail that had once condemned her, and wrote a single sentence on the final page: "Truth survives everything." Her phone rang. It was Mila. "They're airing your story tonight. The whole world will see." Grace stepped out onto her balcony, the sunset washing the city in gold. "Then let them see what truth looks like," she said. The nightmare had ended. Justice had come quietly, not through revenge, but through resilience. And as the wind brushed her face, Grace Porter finally breathed, not as the accused, but as the woman who refused to break.